Bobby, do you mind starting? We'll just kind of make our way this way.
Sure.
All right. Well, yeah, I didn't give you much of a choice there. So.
Bobby John, originally from Toronto, live in Atlanta. For the last few years, a tech entrepreneur. That's what I basically would be my career. And pretty passionate about planting small churches.
All right. Jake Abraham, originally born in India, raised in the Philippines, lived in Australia. I currently live in Washington, D.C. Serve with an organization called CREW, formerly Campus Crusade for Christ, but I actually lead a city gospel network of churches called One Heart D.C., which is a network of about 700 churches in the D.C. area trying to come together to see the city transformed.
Great. Dennis Matthew, I've been at Comcast for 15 years. I currently serve as the SVP and GM of our Western New England region. And I also have been on the planting team for 7 Mile Road and served as a deacon there for 10 years and also served on the board of Bombay Teen Challenge and Advance. And I'm just continuously amazed by how God has knitted all these things together, and I love this conversation.
Nice. Awesome. My name is Justin Varghese, and I'm from Long Island, New York. Got my wife and 2 boys still back there. They wanted to be here, but they didn't. So yeah, I wear a couple of hats. I helped plant a church on Long Island about 8 years or so ago, and then served on the pastoral team there for those 8 years. And I also have a law degree, so I practice law as well. I'm kind of doing that bivocationally for that entire period of time. So which I'm hoping will be talking about some of that kind of stuff will be a meaningful part of our conversation today as well. So yeah, so good to see you all. So what I'd like to do is just take a few minutes to just sort of lay a bit of a foundation that we can build off of during our conversation, right? So I want us to lay a foundation about the way that we see our work, all types of work. Because I want to help us start to see that the storyline of Jesus and the gospel invites us to see our work and our career uniquely and differently than seeing it outside of the lens of the gospel, right? So I think that there can be a sense that our work in the marketplace can be viewed as sort of sometimes lacking in eternal value. How many of you guys feel frustrated at your job sometimes? I know I do, right? So sometimes I'm going through the motions at my workplace, in the marketplace, and I feel that frustration, and sometimes I even resent that job, but I push through because I'm believing that, okay, well, this is, you know, sort of a means to an end, right? Like I get a paycheck, and it's sometimes hard to see the eternal value that exists within our vocations, right? Maybe at best, if we do see its value, we might see that, okay, well, you know what, I've got this vocation in the marketplace, and we see its value as being, it exposes me to a lot of people who don't follow Jesus yet. Now I have the opportunity to bring the gospel to them. I have an opportunity to be light in this dark place. And that is in fact good. It is not less than that, right? But as we take a look at what the gospel, a full view of the gospel has to say about our vocation, the question becomes, is it perhaps even more than that? Is there a larger picture that is being painted through the gospel when we look at our vocations? So that's sort of what I wanted to start to unpack today. No, Jesus and his apostles, especially Paul, had a lot to say about this. Because Paul believed that like the eternal, redemptive story of the gospel in its entirety, in that full picture of what the gospel is, doesn't make our work meaningless, but in fact makes it meaningful, right? And this is what Mohan was starting to talk to us a little bit about yesterday morning, if you were here, right? So I heard this illustration that was really meaningful to me, and I've got a friend who like brings this to life to me just by what she does, all right? So oftentimes, I will be driving down the street, and I will see, like if someone's moving out of their house, you usually know it because what? There's like a pile of their junk on the side of the road, right? So there's old furniture. So I will drive by those old pieces of furniture and I will see like a beat up, dilapidated like table where it's peeling and falling apart. It's been sitting in the rain. And to me, it's like that thing belongs right there on the curb because it ultimately belongs in the dumpster, right? And then my friend Karen, was actually one of the people that we planted the church with, she drives by the very same pile and she sees her next nightstand. And she sees her next coffee table. And she picks that thing up and throws it in the back of her car. And I'm like, this is gross, but I help her. And then she takes it home. And then seriously, like 3 weeks later, I see a picture on Facebook of what she did to it. And it is like mind-blowing. So are any of you guys into that at all? Any of you guys like restore things? Is that a thing at all? Not a one. Huh?
Zero, Charlie. He does.
I love
A little bit? You do some of that? Okay, cool, good. Yeah, so, you know, it's interesting because I think about Karen and I think about myself, and what I notice is that when we're driving by the same pile, she has an imagination about what that current thing could be. Maybe she even sees what it once was and has a desire to restore it to that thing, right? There's an imagination there to see the value in what it could be. So, Mohan opened up Colossians chapter 3 for us, and I want us to just take a quick look at that passage again. So if you have like a phone or an iPad or something and you're able to pull it up, that would be helpful because there's no screen in here. And I'd love to follow along with it. Because I think what Colossians chapter 3 and another passage we're going to look at in 1 Corinthians starts to unpack, I think you can see where I'm going, is that the whole picture of the gospel is that there is a redemptive story that is restoring all things. So let's take a look at how that unfolds a little bit in Colossians chapter 3, all right? So Mohan mentioned this, and I agree. I don't love just like pulling out a couple of verses because there's such a rich context in Colossians chapter 3 that talks a lot about human relationships and working relationships. But there's a principle in verse 23 and verse 24 that transcends all of those specific relationships that we can learn something from. So let's take a look at it. Colossians chapter 3, verse 24. And it says this. It says, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. So I have had this taught to me. I've studied this passage many times before as this call on our lives to kind of change our attitudes about work, right? It's kind of this idea of like, look at your work differently. Change your attitude about work. You're working for the Lord, right? So there's goodness in that, right? There's goodness in that. But for me, it has proven to be just a small step away from me just trying to like change my behavior and manage my behavior and will myself into thinking differently. And what I have found, my personal experience has been that hasn't been sustainable. That I'm able to do that for a little while, and then I'm back to just resenting my job again. And what I really feel like this passage and other passages are inviting us into is not so much to change the way we behave or even change the way we see our work, but to see things differently, to hold our work through a different lens, a lens of the whole gospel. So let's take a look at what is unfolding here. So there's this sort of idea. It says, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, right? So it says, it is the Lord Christ you are serving. Now, that's the statement, that's the idea that, for me, was easy to just kind of roll over and just be like, okay, yeah, well, that's good. Yeah, I'm working for the Lord, so I'm going to try my best to lean into that. But, at some point in my life, I had to step back and be like, wait a minute. This is huge. This is huger than just kind of like trying to will myself into seeing my work differently. What it means that, yes, so we gain a paycheck from our employer, but, in many ways, we're merely lending our time to them, right? Because we work for another, right? That we're working for the Lord, right? And we're invited into sort of seeing the fullness of that, right? So look at what it says. It says, whatever you do in the Lord. So what that means is all types of work can be done in the Lord, right? So if we were lining up here, a panel of people, and you had like a pastor, a missionary, and then you had like, a construction worker, and actually, what Mohan did he made a good point, like when he was holding up his construction stuff, saying like, not a lot of construction workers here, maybe a few, I hope, but we're Indian, so if you've got a pastor, a missionary, IT professional, engineer, and a doctor, right? And just you are to ask, who is it that's doing the work of the Lord? Well, you know what, based on this verse, the churchy answer is like, yeah, everybody in a sense. But if you really ask yourself that question, you're going to say what? You're going to say the missionary or the pastor, right? And leaning into this idea that all type of work, what this passage is saying, whatever you do, that it is done for the Lord, it is the Lord Christ you are serving. It changes our whole perspective if we'd be willing to see that. But there's more, right? But look at what happens next. Look at what it says next. It says, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. So working for the Lord means we're investing in something, towards something, okay? So I'm a lawyer. I do a certain amount of estate work, right? So we hear the word inheritance or estate, and we think naturally that that's something, an estate or an inheritance is something you come into when someone dies, right? And that's normal because that's what the English word connotates. But we have to get a picture of what it is that Paul's talking about here, right? So Paul uses this word all over his letters. You've probably seen it. Whenever he does, what he's talking about is the future hope of Christians, right? He borrows this term, inheritance, from the journey of the Israelites, right? Who come from bondage and they take this journey across the desert. And where is it that they're heading? They're heading to this promised land, right? The land flowing with milk and honey, right? And that land is promised to them. And they, that land that they are heading toward is called what? In these scriptures, it's called their inheritance. And that's not a place that they're going necessarily for vacation. It's a place where they're going in this land flowing with milk and honey, where they can live and work for Yahweh, right? And then so the Israelites' inheritance is this gift where they can live and work in sort of a renewed way. Not in the bondage that they were in Egypt, but in this renewed way of being able to work. And that was their inheritance. And that's the idea that Paul is borrowing this term from when he keeps using that term throughout his letters about the inheritance, right? So just like with that furniture example that we started with, like our ability to see something as having sort of redeemed and restored value is directly connected to the value we place upon that item in the present. Right? So the reason why Karen sees that beat up table and sees her nightstand is because she looks at that and doesn't just say, hey, that will have value after I do something with it. The reason why we pick up that kind of gross thing and put it in the trunk of her car is because she sees value in it in that moment. Even in its current condition, she sees value in it. And she sees what it once was, and she sees what it will be again. Right? So Paul fleshes out this, he talks about this idea of like you're working for the Lord, whatever you do, towards this inheritance, and then he just kind of leaves it there. And I remember reading that and being like, wait, what? No, I need to know more about this, right? And I think he fleshes this out just a little bit more when he writes to the Corinthians. So if you have your Bibles or whatever, just quickly turn to 1 Corinthians 15, and I'll kind of close with this, and we'll get into our discussion a little bit. But I really feel like this fills in some of the gaps of what it is that Paul's background of what's happening in 1 Corinthians in this moment in chapter 15. So the people of Corinth, they're gathering as believers and they're sort of into this whole Jesus thing, but they're struggling with this idea of resurrection, right? They're wondering, they're like, that's the part of the gospel that they're wondering with. And Paul sort of lays out this rich theology around the resurrection, that it's not some ancillary part of the gospel, but it's in fact a core part of the gospel, that it matters immensely. So 1 Corinthians chapter 15, we're going to read at verse 13. It says, if there's no resurrection of the dead, then not even Christ has been raised. And if Christ has not been raised, our preaching is useless, and so is your faith. For if we're going to skip to verse 19. If only for this life we have hope in Christ, we are of all people most to be pitied. Verse 20. But Christ has indeed been raised from the dead, the firstfruits of those who have fallen asleep. Since death came through a man, the resurrection of the dead comes also through a man. This whole passage, this whole portion of 1 Corinthians 15 is this rich explanation of the resurrection. It gets pulled out a lot at Easter time, and I love to talk about it at non-Easter time. Paul's trying to help them see that Jesus is the first one, the first fruit, right? The first one to show us what it means to be changed from this realm where death has the last word to this other realm, the kingdom of God, where death no longer has the last word, right? So when it talks about Jesus being the first fruit, he's the first one who demonstrated that, right? And the fullness of the gospel is that the good news of this story is that there is a future, right? That death does not have the last word. And when we put our faith in Jesus Christ, and we are penetrated by the gospel, that future hope exists for people and for places, right? That in fact, that though Jesus was the first one, he was the first fruit where death no longer had the last word. That when we are in Christ, now death no longer has the last word in us, right? And that's why the resurrection matters. That's why it's not enough that Jesus came and that he died. That Jesus came and that he died and that he rose. Why? Because there's a future hope. There's a future glory. That's what he's getting at. And that full news, that full good news, is a story that has a future for us in which death does not have the last word. Real quick, take a look at verse 50, where this goes on. He says, I declare to you, brothers and sisters, that flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God, nor does the perishable inherit the imperishable. There's like so much here, but listen, I tell you a mystery. We will not all sleep, but we will all be what? Changed, right? In a flash, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, the dead will be raised imperishable, and will be changed. For the perishable must clothe itself with the imperishable, and the mortal with immortality. Do you see what he's describing here? He's describing the renewed, restored, promised land. He's describing our inheritance. Not different than the picture of the inheritance that we saw the Israelites journeying toward. Right? So after laying out this amazing, beautiful, rich, whole view of the gospel, which we could spend like years picking apart, that we just did in like 4 minutes, but after laying all of that out, this idea that Jesus came, that Jesus died, and that he rose, and all of that matters because Jesus, as the embodiment of the kingdom of God, he's saying he brought the kingdom of God to earth. He embodied it in himself, right? And he's saying that there is a future hope, that in fact, that his kingdom would come on earth as it is in heaven. Come now on earth as it is in heaven. So the kingdom being both here and not yet. Maybe you've heard that before, right? Yeah. That as he's saying that, he lays all of that out. This is what really opened my eyes and painted a full picture. Because look at what he says next in verse 58. He says, get to work. Take a look at this. He says, therefore, my brothers and sisters, stand firm, let nothing move you. Always give yourselves fully to the work of the Lord, because you know that your labor in the Lord is not in vain. So, let me tell you guys something. I grew up reading this verse, and it's very normal and natural to read this verse, and you read something like the work of the Lord, and your mind automatically goes to, well, one of two things. It might be, that means like, being a pastor or a missionary. Or maybe at best it means that the energy that I give volunteering at my church, or leading Bible study, or helping lead worship, or whatever it might be, right? And our mind goes to those places when we think about the work of the Lord. And if we hadn't read Colossians chapter 3, maybe we would live in that place. But do you remember what we read about in Colossians chapter 3? What kind of work is working for the Lord? All of our work, right? Everything, whatever you do. And that's so all work is a part of this restorative work of the gospel, bringing his kingdom to bear on earth as it is in heaven. And when we start to see our work as part of a whole view of the gospel, it's not just a means to an end. It's not just a means to get a paycheck to help support the church financially. That is in fact good. But what God is doing in our vocations in the marketplace doesn't end there. Because we are not polishing silver on the Titanic, right? This thing's not going down anyway. It's that God is in the process. What the gospel is in its wholeness is that God is restoring people and he's restoring places. And the thing that he is doing on earth as it is in heaven is he is restoring this place. So be a pastor, be a missionary, be an engineer, be a barista. That whatever we do, we are a part of this amazing picture of God restoring all things, bringing all things to himself. And seeing our work through the lens of the gospel is that. It's appreciating that many of us are doing all different types of things in the marketplace and working in different ways. That, yes, is there benefit to you being in that place and bringing light to that place and sharing the gospel with people? Yes, that is part of the goodness of you being in that marketplace. But also the work itself, the reports you write, the coffee you make, the nail you hammer in, that too is part of the restorative work of the gospel. And that's awesome, guys. And that's sort of like that's kind of like the basement. That's what's holding down everything else we see about our work and how our work fits into everything else in life, how it fits into church planting and family and all of it. So even as we kind of unpack this conversation a little bit today, my hope is that we can work with this as a framework, appreciating that all of our work is part of the redemptive, restorative picture of the gospel. Does that make sense? I know we threw kind of a lot out there in like 15 minutes, and I would encourage you guys, especially that 1 Corinthians passage, like there's so much in there, but if you let God speak to you through that picture of what the implications of the resurrection, and then you connect that to your work, I mean, it will change your life, you know? So, yeah, I feel like we're invited to see this through that framework, and my hope is that this conversation will help unpack that a little bit. So, yeah, so what I'd like to do is just kind of talk through a few questions. We've got like a wealth of knowledge over here. So I would like to just kind of talk through some questions, and as we do, even as we're kind of discussing things, like if you have something that maybe you want to ask that's kind of in line with what we're saying, or you have something that you want to add, I just feel like I recruited these guys in advance, but hey, Vance, see what I did there? I recruited these guys earlier, but I just feel like I'm just looking around at this room, and I just feel like there's like a wealth of knowledge at this table. So and those couches. So I just want to invite you guys to chime in, ask a question, whatever. So I want to start. I want to start with this. When we're talking about sort of a whole healthy view of the gospel, and I want to maybe start off with Jake and ask you this, that how might sort of a healthy view of vocations in the marketplace, kind of with this underpinning of what we talked about, how might a healthy view of the vocations in the marketplace shape sort of the consciousness of the church as it relates to our a whole view of the gospel? So just want to hear maybe what your thoughts were on that to get us started, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, Justin, thank you for giving us that overview. And while this is, in many ways, this is a paradigm shift for the church, that we've got to actually engage with the fact that God's purposes are bigger than what we usually do within the four walls of a church. Right? I was just even reflecting on the fact that when Colossians 3 talks about whatever you do as unto the Lord, my picture often is that I'm working almost like God is sitting on the throne, I'm peeling grapes for Him. And this is my offering, this is what I'm coming to do for Him. But that's not the picture, okay? The picture is we serve a God who's actually active. He's got a plan, and He's executing on that plan. And what He's doing is He's inviting us. And you look a few chapters back in Colossians, what's He doing? For in Him the fullness of God is pleased to dwell, and through Him to reconcile to Himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of the cross. And so, to your point, God is reconciling all things, not just individual lives. Is it about personal salvation? Absolutely, it is. But the reality is God is reconciling all things to Himself. Mo was talking about Abraham Kuyper. I'm a fan of Abraham. I mean, there's a lot of broken things about him. But one of my favorite quotes of Abraham Kuyper, he says that there is nothing in all of creation where the sovereign Lord does not look out on and where He says, that's mine. That's mine. It's not just things in the church. It's actually everything that He looks at and that's mine. So it could be business, it could be the legal profession, government, education, whatever it is, He says that's mine. And so when we look at the idea of the fullness of the gospel and understanding that even within the church, think about it. When Jesus died, what happened? The Bible says that the curtain that separated us from the Holy of Holies was torn in two. Now, that's beautiful that we get to be in relationship with God, but much more than that happened. You know what was on that curtain? If you look back in Exodus, it talks about how what was knitted onto the curtains was the cherubim, the flaming ones. And when an Israelite think of a cherub, what is a cherub? What do they think about? They go back to the Garden of Eden, and there's a cherub that's defending the entry back into the garden. And so what happens is that division was ripped open, and God is inviting us back into what He always planned for us, back in the garden. And that work is a work of that encompasses everything. That God wants us to return back to the place where there was creativity and development, and it's always crazy to me, even before the fall, in terms of work, God tells Adam and Eve to subdue and rule the earth. And you know, when you think about subdue, it's taking something that's wild and bringing it under control. And of course, God's creation was perfect. But God is actually asking us, He asked Adam and Eve to make God's perfect creation even better. And so part of our role as believers, actually, wherever we go, make things better. I love, one of my favorite heroes is William Carey, who was the father of modern missions. Of course, many of us know him as having gone back to India. And of course, he was the father of modern missions. He translated the Bible into 50 some odd languages because he was a genius. But a lot of the other things William Carey did, he introduced the steam engine into India, horticulture into India, the library system into India. He lobbied for the conservation of forests in Burma. I always tell that to my friends in the Northwest because he was the original tree hugger, right? And then he started schools for girls. I mean, you go down the list. He was a man who saw the gospel and the redemption of the gospel as whole. It's part of the whole package. And the sad thing that we have done as a church often is we've reduced the faith to personal piety. To just, let's just get somebody saved and let's get them reading their Bible. But God is bigger than that. God is much bigger than that. It's far more than personal piety. It's about entering into what God is doing to redeem everything. And that's why, you go back to Matthew chapter 5, Jesus said, with the light of the world, let your light shine before men that they may see your good works. Now, it doesn't say about good word. Of course, we have to communicate. It says good works, that they may glorify the Father in heaven. And he says, don't hide that light, and nobody puts it under a basket. Well, sadly, often our churches have tended to be the basket. Because we've reduced the call of God to the four walls of the church. And yet God always intended for us to put that light on a lampstand to shine, for the good works to be seen everywhere. And so what does that mean? That means that for all of us who aren't in the four walls of church, because usually, I'm a vocational minister, and so often my work is in the four walls of the church, right? If it's just about pastors and elders and people within the four walls of a church, then we become a basket. But the way that we actually engage is by engineers and doctors and lawyers and people living out their calling. Okay, give me an example. One of the projects that I got a chance to work on in DC is something called the Redemption Collective. And the Redemption Collective is a coming together, so we're partnering with churches. Now this is established churches, but we're looking at church plants as well. And it's a four parts to this approach. One is it's based off of a local church. But the second is we're trying to start a craft coffee shop that employs returning citizens. So returning citizens are previously incarcerated men and women. Now a lot of the churches we work with in DC are heavily African American, and this is a significant part of their story. And they've got a heart to actually serve returning citizens. So there's a craft coffee shop. And so we're engaging people in the church that are baristas, to your point. And they can live out their redemptive calling. There's a shared co-working space that we're building. And so it's a place where people can come and work together. Of course, WeWork is in the news all the time. But what if there was a redemptive WeWork that was actually also profitable, right? You can get people like your Bobbies of the world as an entrepreneur to come in. In fact, we're starting an incubator accelerator to start businesses as part of that. That's the fourth part. And so you're engaging people who have expertise in business. You've got people that have expertise in making coffee. You've got people that have expertise, and you name it. And everybody has a part to play. Now that's just a practical, maybe a tangible example, but that doesn't mean that you have to be contained within a Redemption Collective. You can do it within your profession, wherever you are. And so I think at some level, we as a church need to shift and ask the question of how do we actually be that light on a lampstand, as opposed to being contained? And the way that we do that is by believing that God is restoring and renewing all things, that He's inviting us to a greater vision than what we often reduce ourselves to. And that gives life. That gives life to us who've been wondering, why I'm in the church. Am I just supposed to be there in the pews? And of course, praise the Lord, we need to be able to serve. There's kids ministry to do, and there's ushering to do, and there's giving, of course, that you need to be doing. But God's vision is far more than the four walls of the church.
Yes, I love that. I feel like you touch on, when we talk about beyond the four walls, I think it's because our tendency is to feel like, you know what, like our work in the marketplace is over here, and then church and ministry are over here. And we talk a lot about, breaking down this divide between the sacred and the secular, right? Trying to step away from dualism, right? But listen, I've been in ministry a long time, and left to my own devices in my heart of hearts, it is easy to walk toward that, right? That there's work over here, there's the marketplace over here, and then there's church and ministry and spiritual and sacred over here. And what I love that you're getting at is this idea of tearing, a whole view of the gospel tears down the wall between the sacred and the secular, right? In so much as this is all a part of God's story, that He is in the business of redeeming and restoring all of it. And just hearing what you touched on, and Bobby, I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about this, like the relationship, the connection between, sort of one's vocation in the marketplace, entrepreneurship, the things that we see in the marketplace. How do you feel like these things inform one another? How does that inform this sort of larger picture of what God is doing in the church and through the church in the restoration of all things?
Yeah, I'd say right now, like with my foot, kind of having one foot in like startup tech world and one foot in church planting and church world, and having some experience pastoring a more traditional church and then now planting smaller churches, I would say in the last 10 years I've seen kind of the startup business world really set the example for the church, honestly. For sure in all of your cities in the last 10 years it's become cool if you say you have a startup, right? And even some Indian parents might be okay with that now. But they were not when I did it. Because you should just go get a corporate job that they could brag about. You work at IBM or whatnot. But now there's been enough success that it's interesting. And I think in terms of what we could learn from that is, like, what makes the United States what it is, the #1 economy on the planet, is business. And for most of us, we think like Google, Uber, IBM, Microsoft, Johnson & Johnson or whatnot. But in this country, there are 30 million small businesses. 30 million. You know what percentage of businesses that is? Of all businesses in the United States? 99.9%. 99.9% of this economy are small businesses. Like, that's what makes it run. You can get rid of, if you got rid of all the big companies, it probably wouldn't hurt us too much, but you got rid of all the small ones, we'd be done. We only have 0.1 left. So where do most people work? What most people doing? That means, like, if there's 30 million, that means like 1 out of every 15 people you bump into probably owns a business. Right? And what this country did is made it very, very easy. Like, we are one of the easiest countries, and one of the first ones that made it easy to start a business. And #2, now, in 2019, we celebrate, and you still kind of celebrate when someone says they quit their job and start a business. Like, you're like, whoa, you're brave, you're smart, whoa. And you talk about it when you get in the car with your husband, and she quit her job and started a business, right? And you're kind of jealous and you wish you could do it too. So we do celebrate it as well, and we celebrate the diversity of it. It doesn't matter if you're, got a store on Shopify, it doesn't matter if you started Google or whatever, it's still a business. Like, the definition of a business is so varied and can look so different. And we are okay with that, right? And if you go, I went to India a couple years ago, and that guy selling chai on the side of the road, he's an entrepreneur. Like, he has his own business. And so is the CEO or the founder of Google. Not the CEO, it's not the founder anymore, but the founder of Google also started a great business. They're both entrepreneurs, they're both business owners. In the church, they're kind of all looking the same these days. That's what I think is the biggest thing that we could be informed of, is like, I don't think churches look different enough. I don't think there's enough creativity. I think everyone's looking for some sort of rule book on how to build it, some sort of plan on the 10 steps to do it. I think they all kind of have the same kind of order of service and the definition of it. And if like someone says like you started a church, your mind right away, you know what, like some picture comes in your head. You don't have to even ask too many questions about it. Oh, you started a church, thanks. Like I know what that means. A bunch of people are sitting forward in a building probably somewhere or in a school, and there's probably a couple songs in the beginning, and then like some Psalms reading, if you're Malayali, Pentecostal, then there's like 3 sermons or whatever, and prayers and whatever, like it's in your mind. But in a business, if someone says they started a business, your next question is gonna be, what is it? Because nothing comes to your mind. It's a complete blank piece of paper. And you are so curious to hear what creative idea did you come up with? And I just wish the church was like that. I wish if I said I started a church, you'd be like, what's it like? What'd you do? What was the idea? And we just heard Jason James say, you need a desire, and then he said we pray for creativity. And I just don't think we're all just saying, like, someone give me a manual on how to do it. I think that's sad. I think that's sad. So I hope that kind of changes. And we talk a lot about, I'm on a soapbox on this thing, so sorry. If you test everything I say with whatever the Holy Spirit tells you, and whatever the Bible says. So I'm not guaranteed to be right. It's more from experience than anything. But we heard about how many churches are closing. What was the stat? Like, tons of churches are closing, not enough churches are starting. Well, let's talk about businesses in the United States. 6 in the United States. Great, right? What an amazing country. 595,000 businesses closed last year in the United States. We're still the #1 economy. It's still, a lot of people are getting jobs. It's still great. And so instead of like, let's not worry about how many are closing churches, like let's just start tons of them. And let's make them all look different. And it's okay if a bunch of them fail. And for us at Advance, I'm just like, who cares how many fail? Just start them. Right? Like we'll see, they'll still learn something through the process. They'll start another one later and maybe do better. Maybe they'll join one and be a better member of one after they've started one. Like there's so many good things that can just come out of just starting. Right? And so I hope we can be informed from what's happening in the business world.
I love that.
Just go crazy.
Yeah, I appreciate that so much. I feel like you look around this room and you see the creativity and diversity of vocational experience that's in this room, right? Different people doing different things in different ways. And the thought that God might be asking us to explore how all of that diversity of experience and vocation and creativity informs the building of the kingdom here on earth as it is in heaven. Why? Because it's one thing, right? Your work and your work for the Lord is in fact one thing. So, I mean, I love that they really do inform one another. You know, someone says, I love the way you pose those questions, because someone says, yeah, oh, I planted a church. I feel like the only information we should have is, oh, that means that there's a community of people bearing the presence of Jesus to the community around. That's all I know. So there should be, in theory, there would be next questions, right? Like, so what does that mean? What does that look like in your context? How, right? And I really believe, you know, you might be starting to hear and notice that things like more bivocational models are becoming more common. People planting more house churches and churches from within the marketplace in a lot of ways is becoming more common. Why? Because I just really believe that God is doing something unique in this moment of time. That's why I was praying that. I pray that every time, because I just feel so much that in any moment in time that we are here on this earth, God's doing something unique. And I can't help but feel like He's doing something unique in the way that He is helping tear down the wall between the sacred and the secular in a way that reaches into our work, into what we have been holding over here while the church is over here, right? So Dennis, you gave us like a great, like I was just listening to the things that you do when you were introducing yourself, and I was like, man, this guy's awesome. So, but when we were talking on the phone, you were sharing a little bit about how, even like when you get like where the rubber meets the road, like how you have found like some of your skills, your gifts, your abilities that you utilize and develop in the marketplace, how those things bring special benefit to the building of the kingdom on earth as it is in heaven, right? The restoration of all things, including in church environments and elsewhere. So can you just tell us a little bit about how you've experienced that, what that's been like?
Yeah, and this is, I was trying to think through a number of examples, but I'll give this one because it really just ties together how the Lord has opened doors, and I'm at my job because of God. Like, stop, period, done. About 10 years ago, we started getting involved with an organization called Bombay Teen Challenge, which is furthering the gospel in Mumbai, and they're rescuing women and children who are victims, survivors of human trafficking. And we wanted to raise funds to support that work, and that means supporting the work of the gospel. And in my role at work, I began talking about this, that, hey, there's an organization that is doing incredible work. And, I remember some of my close friends, even those that worked at BTC, and we'll make sure we don't publish this or whatever, said, hey, you may want to be careful about the way you're talking about this. You don't want this to impact your career. You don't want people to, I said, brother, my career is in the Lord's hands. If I'm talking about this and something happens to my career, so be it. And so I started to, we have folks in the company. I have companies that I work with that I give millions of dollars of work to. So they do consulting work, and said, you know what? They should participate in this work of building the kingdom. And so we started to do work to raise funds and raise support for that work in India. And 10 years later, we've raised over $2 million to support an academy, to support medical clinics and those types of things. And God has given me, wisdom on how to have these conversations. But I'm not shy about the fact that we're working on a faith-based organization that is doing an incredible work for women and children, and I think you should be a part of it. And that's the conversation we're having. And folks are giving $10, $20, $30,000. And I say that because, again, the Lord has placed each of us, and I'm not saying that, hey, you're going to take that example and replicate it, but I said, hey, God placed me here for a reason, and as I look around and I think about why I'm here, here's a way that I can use where God has placed me to build His kingdom. And as I think about 7 Mile Road and being a deacon at the church, and the skills that I've learned practically in terms of finance and leadership and influence and collaboration, I bring that every day. Every day I bring that to church and to BTC and to Advance. And I bring that back to work. It's literally like the things I learned, working with this guy is impossible. And then I learn, and then I have to take it back to work. And then, but it's just amazing how God, brings all of these things together. These skills that God is teaching at work and teaching in Advance, they all, feed each other to drive His kingdom forward.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I love that. This idea that you are you, who God made you, who God made me, who He made all of us. You are you now, yesterday, now, eternity, future, right? And so all of the goodness of that I feel like this invitation to see that the restorative work of the gospel is a whole picture is what empowers us to realize that all of the goodness of who God has made you, it permeates all of these different areas, right? It causes us to view our work differently, view our church ministry differently, view our ministry with our families differently, view all of it a little bit differently. So I wanted to just take a minute, and I know we did a bunch of talking up here. I would love to just open it up, see if any of you guys have any thoughts or questions or anything you wanted to add about this that maybe you've experienced, or a question that's been rolling around in your head.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was very insightful. I wanted to ask you guys a question in terms of just the perspective of doing the work of planting while you're doing your work, which might be any work for the Lord, whether you're planting a startup business while planting a church. But it looks like often when people talk about planting or doing something for the Lord, advancing His kingdom, it kind of comes across as first you do your business, make it flourish. You work on your career, get to a place where then you could use what you've gained in your career to support the work of God. Do you have any thoughts on doing both at the same time? And I'm asking this just from my own perspective, or some of the people here, they might be just starting their careers. They might be in a place where they're thinking, do I need to, I'm thinking, I want to do a startup. And at the same time, I want to do a startup church. And what does it take? Like, doing a startup, I live in the Bay Area, and it takes everything. It's not just like, oh, I go to work 9 to 5, and then I could also do my church thing 5 to 9 or something like that. So, do you guys have any thoughts? I asked this especially in this context that I kind of feel like, we are living in an age of specialization, right? It looks like in the past, people had time to grow their own fruit in the yard, and their own vegetables, while they write books on theology, while they're engaging other people in the marketplace. But now, you say you're a doctor. What doctor are you? Are you a neurologist, a nephrologist, a urologist, a radiologist? Like, we are living in a world of specialization. So does that mean that there are increasing challenges that we have to face? Then we're trying to do too many things at the same time. I have some thoughts on this, but I want to hear your thoughts and kind of open it up as to what people think. Yeah.
I love that, yeah.
Wants to jump in?
Yeah, you should do both. Don't overthink it. It's like we're in an amazing country called America where there's help wanted everywhere. It's easy to get a job. There's opportunity all over to make money. So I don't know why everyone's like trying to raise money. Just go find some job you like and plant a church. Be happy.
That's encouraging to hear.
What's your name, brother, by the way?
Sam.
Sam. Yeah. I'll follow up on that. One of the things that Bobby and I have been working on, in fact, we gathered a group even in Atlanta, Travis and others were there, is, usually when you plant a church, there's this concept that, and I'll speak for DC, that's where I'm at, right? If somebody's going to plant a church, they spend a couple of years raising $500,000 to almost $1 million so that they can actually come and plant a church, right? Maybe that's on the expensive side, but whatever the case is, there's so much, it's almost this model that's almost expected that you would do that. So, we were asking the question, what if instead of spending 2 to 3 years doing that, you actually spend time starting a business? And that business is going to provide income, it's going to provide inroads, because you're dealing with customers, you're dealing with the suppliers, you're dealing with the Chamber of Commerce, you're dealing with the community, whatever it is, right? And what if you do that for the first time? And of course, startups in the front end, intense, right? But at some point, there's a flexibility that comes from starting a business that actually provides you the margin to be able to plant a church. Now that's a very different model. And now here's the thing with that: we've talked about you're not going to plant the next what is this church, Northway? Village, right? You're not going to plant the next village, and you're not going to start the next Google. In fact, one of the things we coined was something called minimum viable ecclesiology. Like, what is the very basic MVE that you need in order to be a church? Right? You don't need to be a mega. So the point is, we got to get creative about this. I mean, God is a God that's, literally in Genesis, He creates the world in 6 days and then goes and tells us to be like Him. We should create. If anything, we should create. We should think outside the box. We don't need, and so we can, when you think about how we're going to plant, 5,500 churches or whatever it is, just to break even. But if you think about businesses, there's 60,000 businesses getting started. Let's think. We are ordained to be a creative people as God's people. We've got to be able to think outside the box, and we've got a community to come alongside. We've got people who have expertise in starting businesses. Why do we leverage that for the sake of the kingdom? Think differently. But that means, to Bobby's point, we got to think differently. What we've kind of defined as a church and all the stuff that goes with it, we've got to go back and say, okay, what is a church? And are we willing to think differently outside the box and trust God for a different future? And then maybe we can plant 60,000 churches. Okay? God's not that's big enough to do that, right?
Yeah, incredible answers, and I'll just add, I think your basic question, what I'm hearing is, when is the right time? When is the right time to start a church? When is the right time to start a business? And what you've heard overwhelmingly is, because everybody here is wired a certain way, the time is now. That's not to say you shouldn't do the proper preparation, you shouldn't seek counsel, you shouldn't talk to 10 people, you shouldn't,
count the cost.
Count the cost. So when is the time? The time is now. But go prepare and get ready. And don't, there's no reason to be foolish about it. You have people that have done it, so leverage those people. Hey, when have I taken on too much? Are you a husband?
Yes.
Are you a father?
No.
When you are not able to fulfill your duty as a father, as a husband, you're taking on too much. God has called you first to be a husband, then for me to be a father, and if I'm not able to do that for His glory, then everything else is forgotten. And so that's my barometer of, hey, am I doing too much? And the moment that it starts to impact my ability to be the husband that I need to be to my wife and the father to my children, I say no. That's it. I'm not doing it anymore. Because no matter what other ministry I'm doing, if I'm failing dumb, like I'm failing good. And so that's the measure of, at least my measure of, hey, am I taking on too much?
I say the reason we often take on too much is because we often think it's on us. And so much, you look at the New Testament, churches were planted in teams. It was always about, sometimes we can elevate the individual, and that's when you bite off too much, because of course if it's gonna rest on you, you're gonna burn out and it's gonna fail. But if you figure how do we get creative and how do we do it together, because that's how God always intended. The church ultimately, it's a mob, right? That's the translation. It's a group of people. So how do we do that together?
Yes, there's sort of that healthy tension there, right? There's this inspired, yes, let's do it now, right? And all this, the ideas about that the future of Jesus' church may look creatively different, right? In form, many times, right? Though its purpose will remain the same. And then there's that tension of that's inspiring, let's do this now. Then there's that tension of when, how, right? And I love the way we're talking about both of those things. So I'll tell you, me personally, I've experienced that. So it plays itself out in lots of different realms, right? I love what you were sharing about just our first ministry. If you are a spouse or a father or mother, that ministry to your family that you've been entrusted with, right? That's huge, right? And honoring that first. But I will say that for me, I also found, I've been learning about myself over the years, running a law firm and also planting a church and pastoring and being a father and a husband, right? So I've got all these balls in the air. Two things were helpful to me. One, starting to realize that, I love what Jason was saying, appreciating and understanding our limits, right? That, so I started to realize I only have a certain amount of emotional credit to give, and I only have a certain amount of mental credit, a lot less credit than these guys, most of you. But I only have so much to give. And starting to appreciate that when I was really starting to feel unhealthy was when I was letting that tension try to absorb more resources than God has given me. So it was a matter of I really loved what Jason was talking about, understanding our limits, and Jake just touched on it too. That the flourishing of Jesus' church is not on my shoulders, and it's not on yours. At the same time, the tension that exists there is not to use that as a reason to rust out. My wife and I always say, we're big Switchfoot fans. Any Switchfoot fans here?
Yep.
Switchfoot's awesome, okay? So John and Tim Foreman's parents wrote this book that if you have not read it, you've got to read it. It's called Never Say No, but it's not what you think. There's a parenting philosophy where you literally never say no. That's not what they're talking about. But they had this sort of life philosophy that Sherry and I kind of picked up, which is that we'd rather burn out than rust out. And what we mean by that is we still protect ourselves and our family, literally. Burning out can have an unhealthy connotation to it, right? But they're talking about living in this tension and not using, using boundaries as a way to be stagnant and rust out, and remaining in that tension. That, yes, God, I'm inspired about this thing that you're calling me to, and I'm also trusting you on how do we do it in a way that is healthy for me, for my family, for my business, for the church, for my friends, for my brothers and sisters, right? And just constantly living in that tension. So, so yeah, I thought that's a great question. There's no easy answer, but I think at a minimum, it's this idea of appreciating that there is a tension in there, leaning into that tension, asking God for wisdom and guidance in that tension, and letting Him paint the picture of what that looks like for you. So,
Well, Hudson Taylor, the missionary, would always say, God's plan never lacks his resources. So if God calls you to something, He's going to provide for that, whatever that is, because it's God's plan. He's the one executing on it, right? So I think it's kind of coming back to your point. I mean, we've got to, this is God's deal. And if He's going to call you to it, He's going to give you resources for it. But get that calling right. And some people, there's a lot of people that go into church planning that should not be in church planning. And there are a lot of people that are sitting on the sidelines that should be, that aren't in it, right?
I did have one question.
yeah, sure.
Especially when it comes to your own firm, or being like a high executive, or being an entrepreneur. What are some ways that you have shaped the culture of your organization or your team, or any other types of like your employees being able to see that, hey, this guy's different.
Yeah, I mean, culture is so important. I think it's something that I've been living and breathing, and I'm cognizant of it every day that I show up. And being able to, so in Philadelphia I had 100 people. Now we've got, now I've got 2,000 people, and literally every conversation, every time I'm delivering a message to a team, there's a tone and there's a way to deliver that, to be able to set that culture. And a lot of it is how do you establish a healthy culture and also maintain your your faith and your and your ideals and in every conversation. And so I don't back away from the fact that hey, I'm a Christian, I love the Lord, and that's there. But then how does that translate into my day-to-day conversation and how I treat people? And hey, when there's conflict, who is Dennis? And when there's an employee issue, who is Dennis? And when when things are going good, how is Dennis? And hey, when the business results aren't in, who is Dennis? And there's a way to set a tone that says, hey, the way he's portraying himself really does tie back to, okay, he's a Christian, he loves the Lord, and I'm cognizant of that. It's so easy, especially in corporate America or just in day-to-day, to get caught up by when something goes wrong, there's conflict, there's an issue, there's, all of a sudden conversations can go sideways and in my mind, it's always like, hey, I am an ambassador for the Lord, I'm here, and I really focus on setting the tone in every single interaction, which is hard, like it can be emotionally and mentally draining at times, but I do recognize that, hey, this is another way of, hey, how does ministry and work come together, and how to set an example so that folks don't see a disconnect in that, oh, wait a minute, he said this, but then this meeting happened and he reamed out 15 people. That doesn't make sense. Is that the way? And so that's always, on the top of my mind of, hey, how do we live our faith? And living our faith includes the way we treat people and how we give them respect and how we maintain positivity even in hard times.
Yeah, for myself, with my approach is always I hire for attitude and train for skill. That's my saying I say to all my managers. It's like, we hire for attitude, we train for skill. So when I'm hiring, I look at the person and go what is this person going to bring to our culture, to our company? And it's not so much the skill, it's what are they like? And what's something, and especially on a diversity topic, I also look could they bring something different? Is there something different based on the country they grew up in, the parents that they had, what they've done before? What richness will they bring to our culture? The skills, we'll get there. We can train them if they got that. And then I think if you attach that to kind of church planting, if I'm talking to any of you here, I'm just looking at your heart, right? I'm not really interested if you can speak to 1,000 people, 10,000 people, if you're eloquent, if you really know the Bible inside out, if you're organized, if you're a good project manager. Like, I'm none of those things. Can't remember how old I am anymore. So like, it's just like I'm like not good at details. But if your heart, like all I look for, like I would be challenged if you guys all want to just see more disciples be made on this earth, if that's your heart, your true heart, to see more disciples, I would challenge you to convince me that you couldn't plant a church. You wouldn't be. I would show you could do it. Because everything else can be learned. It's just, those are skills. So I think that example of like how Jesus assembled the disciples, and they're all very different, and they all brought something different to the table, is kind of what I try to teach my company, and then that I care about them more than the company. I do that all the time. I'll make sure. And I'll say that to them. I care about you more than this company. Even if I'm firing them. I care about you more than this company. And this company's not good for you. You gotta go.
Yeah, even in that, you can do that in a way that still glorifies the Lord, right? I mean, you can make sure that you're not surprising people, that you're giving them options, that you're helping them. Hey, this isn't like I'm showing up in your office one day and telling you to clean up and get out. This is, hey, we're gonna talk about this for 60 days or 90 days, and I'm gonna coach you, and I'm gonna tell you what's not working, and we're gonna try to fix this. And hey, by the way, we're gonna agree that in 90 days, if this doesn't work, we're just gonna part ways. And that can happen. But it doesn't mean like you have to like be like, I'm gonna just keep all these people forever. Like, no, we're gonna have an honest conversation. You're doing great, you're not doing great, but there's a way to do it that glorifies the Lord. And so that no one says, hey man, did you see the way you treated that person? That's a disconnect, I don't get it.
Yeah, I feel like it's helpful for us to see that, discipleship in a person's life, including all of our lives, and so much as God is God of process and is God of journey, that discipleship in a person's life starts before they come to know Jesus, right? Just as it did in ours. Just as the seed was planted and watered, right? Before it was sown, right? It was reaped, rather. So, appreciating that even in our workplaces, that we have the opportunity to disciple people. So I was talking to my friend Gerald, who's here. He's not here, is he? No. He's here, though. And he's a good example because he did these things one at a time. Where he was vocationally a pastor for a while, and now he's got a job in the marketplace. And he was talking about how he sees how he has the opportunity to pastor his coworkers and shepherd them, even though many or most of them don't know Jesus yet, right? And it's like you can take the pastor out of the church, or you can't take, I don't know, I'm going to screw that up. But you know what I'm saying, right? Yeah, I don't think that flows out. But anyway, where he sees that as an environment where he can pastor people there. And whatever your gift is, and however that fleshes itself out on the call in our lives to be discipling people, that we have the opportunity to do that in our workplaces in a very real and tangible way. And that is in fact part of the restorative picture of the gospel, of what God's doing. Yeah.
President, I just want to add one more thing. Part of it is, the ideals are always perfect at workplace. We aspire to those things. And other part is also taking ownership of our failures. And, we try to do things to be the right manager, the right person, right coworker, and so forth. But just like at home, as our wives or kids could attest to, we fail. And it is perfectly honest to take ownership of those failures in front of our coworkers that are not Christians. And so that we don't portray this image of ourselves in front of people, hey, I'm Christian, therefore I only operate on these ideals. Hey, I messed up. And that is a great witness for us to take ownership at our workplaces.
I love that. I love that because I think a lot of people's beef with Christianity is they feel like it's not authentic, right? So that vulnerability, which is authentic, represents the gospel well, right? So we are pretty much running out of time, but I saw you raise your hand. Do you want to, just one more question?
Talking about God as a God of process, right? And a startup or being a C-level executive doesn't happen in a day. So could you talk about more of, a journey of discipline, of time management, of, how you focus just on your vision and where you want to go and how you get to it.
I'll just give a short answer, and then I'd love for if any of you guys can chime in. For me, the short and most important part of my answer has to do with not doing that in a vacuum, like not doing that by yourself. So I think I was the most stressed out and the most confused about life and calling and how all of these things work together when I was trying to figure it out myself. Not even having let even my wife into that process. And then once I did, and then let others into that process, I realized, well, yeah, now this makes sense. We bear the presence of Jesus to one another, right? So allowing for other people to speak into that process, help me discern, lean on their wisdom went a long way. So that's for me, that was like the most important thing.
For myself, I would just say, I try to be wise on where I spend my time. I've got 4 kids. My wife works as well, and we planted a church, and I have a business, and I'm an investor in a bunch of startups and mentoring a bunch of entrepreneurs as well. So, but I feel like I have a lot of time, to be honest with you. How do I say that? I don't watch TV. I'm not on social media. So a lot of time sucks. I don't play video games anymore so much. Just yell at my boys for always playing video games. That's where that time goes.
That takes time.
Yes, it takes a lot of time. So I say that, but I do know if I really think about it, there's a lot of stuff I don't do that's sucking up a lot of people's time. And I'm just really focused on the stuff that matter to me, which is my family, planting churches, and starting businesses. That's it. That's me. That's all I want to do.
Yeah, I definitely screwed that up early in my marriage in terms of saying, hey, I work and ministry are so important, and then being a part of learning the gospel has helped me understand that my first ministry is being a husband. And so I think having an open conversation with my wife on what life looks like and what does the week look like and when am I working and when am I home, and having an understanding of that and what we're comfortable with. And what we're comfortable with may look way different than what somebody else is comfortable with. On a very practical level, again, this is not for everybody, it's clear I'm leaving my house at 7 in the morning and I'm coming back at 7:30, and we're gonna have dinner, pray, and God has blessed us that Liz is a lawyer, but she's at home and she's working on things, and then on the weekend is for the family, right? So we know that, hey, I'm showing back up at home, at least in the evening, to have dinner and pray, and then the weekends we protect hard with, on Saturdays and things like that. So those are, we've talked about that, and if I'm eating into that, she's gonna call me out and say, hey, there's 3 days this week you didn't show up at. And you're like, you ended up working till 8:30 instead of, coming back at 7:30, what's going on, right? Or if I'm Saturday, I'm in the morning, I'm on the, doing email instead of taking my kids out to breakfast, hey, what's happening? And so I think so that week might look different for other people, right? Sure, I don't get a chance to watch as much TV as I like and, all that other stuff, but that's okay.
You work at Comcast.
Yeah, exactly. But we have a very clear, or if I am gonna be late, or if I am, he's the one that's gonna, say, we're gonna have a conversation about it.
Yeah, I said I don't watch TV. My wife's right there. It's gonna be a problem. I watched every Toronto Raptors game. Every single one.
Nice.
So,
You picked the right
I'll just
season.
add, if my home team is doing well, I will watch it. Other than that, I don't watch it.
You still had time.
Yeah, so that's okay.
Nice. So, guys, lunch has already been cut short, so we can't cut it any shorter. But at best, this, my hope is that this is the beginning of a conversation. So, yeah, let's keep talking about this with each other, with us, with everyone who's around here. So.